What's up, everybody? So welcome back. We're continuing the series entitled Chosen, where we've been discovering these men of God, or rather rediscovering these men of God who have been chosen from the beginning of time up until this point where Stephen's making this address, answering the question about why he's making these why he's preaching this message that is so contradictory to what these law keepers and these law-based believers were following. So if you haven't read before verse 36 in chapter 7, go back and check out my last two videos and read through those and hear just kind of the progression of Stephen's speech and how he's gotten to where he's gotten so far. Today though, I want to focus on verses 37 through 43, and then later this week I'll come back to verses 44 through 60 and we'll discover the rest of chapter 7, just to bring it all in context and to help you get an understanding of what Stephen is talking about. So as I mentioned, we'll begin at verse 37 and we'll end at verse 43, and we'll discover and kind of pinpoint a few verses within this set of verses so that we can hone in on a common theme. And here we go. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai and with our fathers. He received living oracles to give us. Our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt, saying to Aaron, make for us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who led us out from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days and offered a sacrifice to the idol and were rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away and gave them over to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring me slain beasts and sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You took up the tent of Moloch and the star of your god Rephan, the images that you made to worship, and I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. So some of those words I probably mispronounced. Please forgive me. One day I'm just going to study how to pronounce these words, or these names rather. But so now we're at the turning point, kind of the pivotal moment of Stephen's speech. So up until this point, he just kind of introduced like God's faithfulness through Abraham, God's faithfulness through Moses, and they were delivered. And Moses brought them to the land, or showed signs and wonders, and all these beautiful depictions of God's grace and goodness through it all. So in this particular section, we're looking at the turning point, because now this is actually the Israelites rejecting that goodness that God was wanting to show them for so long. And when we go back up to the top, we started in verse 37, but if we go to verse 39, it says, our fathers refused to obey him, blatantly rebel against the knowledge and the truth that they've gained about God, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt, and they chose their own worship. They chose to celebrate themselves and to acknowledge the work of their own hand. And if you keep reading, it says that through the worshiping of idols, through the pagan worship, through just rejecting the man of God that God sent, the chosen man that God sent for a chosen people to deliver them out so that they can serve God and everything about God. They rejected that. They completely rebelled against that by making their own God in some sense, which we know that there's no other God above God. And so the reason why this is a turning point in Stephen's speech is because it leads to the place where we need Jesus. It leads to the place where we know in and of ourselves we cannot do it on our own, that we're incapable of producing our own righteousness, of becoming right before God in and of our own effort. And this is exactly what the children of Israel did. They took their righteousness and their goodness into their own hands. Rather than acknowledging the God that delivered them out of Egypt, out of slavery, that brought them into a place in a time where they didn't have to rely on anyone but God, that God was meeting all their needs, God was providing for them and being a king for them, and they literally rejected that. And in some sense, it's probably because of the pride that swelled in them, thinking that they were able to do what they could do without God, when it was God who brought them out of the land of Egypt into this new promise that he was, or not really new, but into this covenant fulfilled that he granted to Abraham. And in some sense, we find ourselves doing that today. Now we live by our own works, we live by our own efforts, we acknowledge the work of our hand without acknowledging the creator of it all, without acknowledging the one who delivered us out of it all, without acknowledging the one who gives us chance after chance, extends grace to us, shows us love beyond measure. Like, this is just their story, but a bigger concept of what life looked like or looks like when we don't choose God, or when we put more faith in ourselves rather than putting faith in God. And so as we're reading this, I don't want to harp too much on it, because guess what, all my videos are 10 minutes, so this one's gonna be shorter. But I pray that as we read this theme, that we start to like see God's story in these verses and truly absorb it, like so much, to where we begin to live out life in faith and in obedience, learning from the stories of the Israelites, learning from their decisions, learning from just reading about what happens when we don't choose God, or when we try to take life into our own hands and don't acknowledge his sovereignty and don't acknowledge his goodness. And not so much that the same consequences will happen, although we kind of separate ourselves from God when we choose a life that is not God, because that's sin. But not so much that we'll be wandering in a wilderness, but theoretically, yes, in a wilderness apart from God, separated truly from the heart of God, truly from what God desires for us ultimately as his creation. So I pray that as you read the scriptures, that you'll just begin to absorb that, and you'll begin to reflect on that, and ask God to help you to become more like him, and ask God to give you a heart for his goodness, a heart for his plans and what he has for us, and just surrender that. Let it go. Let go of life. Let go of what you think is good for you, and truly allow the Lord to lead you in your walk with him. So again, I'll be studying on Facebook, I'll be studying on Twitter out loud, on Instagram, on Pinterest, and you're watching YouTube. Join me, y'all. Join me. And like I mentioned, later in this week, I'll be coming back to do another video to highlight verses 44 through 60, just to kind of close out Stephen's speech regarding his answer about why his message has been so controversial to a law-based people. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye.